You're listening to CinePunked. This episode, Plan 9 from Outer Space. For many, its reputation precedes it. Hailed by some as one of the worst, if not the worst film ever made, and its director, an incompetent who wouldn't be remembered were it not for Tim Burton's acclaimed biopic. But Plan 9 from Outer Space is undoubtedly an iconic piece of 1950s B-movie history. Built around footage of the late former Dracula actor Bela Lugosi, alongside former wrestler Tor Johnson, original Scream Queen Vampira, and the hugely unreliable prognosticator The Amazing Criswell. This fever dream of a feature sets its cast of oddballs among a plot of government conspiracies, alien invasions, and the reanimated corpses of the recently deceased. On this edition of the CinePunked podcast, we are paying homage to director Ed Wood, born 100 years ago this month. I'm your host, Robert J. Simpson, director of CinePunked, broadcaster and film historian, and I've spent far too much time watching Ed Wood films this last week. Joining me is my regular collaborator, Neil Sedgewick, a man who says yes far too quickly to my suggestions. The Paul Marco to my Ed Wood, I guess. Neil, it's lovely to have you back again. We were just talking before this. We have not done a CinePunk podcast for nearly 2 years. What the heck has happened?
I know, it's good to be back. I think we've just we've been in hiatus. Our demise has been much misspoken of, however. We return from the dead, like some of these people in this movie.
In this film, yeah. I mean, I just want to address this just while we start, because obviously, if you have subscribed to us in the past, you've listened to our stuff. There's been a lot of changes behind the scenes over the last little while. CinePunked has not been inactive. You may or may not have heard it, but we do have another podcast that we've been doing with the Accidental Theatre in Belfast, and that's the Never Seen It Film Club. So you will hear me and see me on that a lot. But Neil and I did do a pod record, I think about a year ago, just before I went and moved house and did all kinds of silly things, and we decided it wasn't good enough for you, so we mothballed it, and then it's taken us until October 2024 to get back into doing stuff. So apologies for the wait. I hope it's worth your while.
I hope it will be. I am feeling very, very silly about this film, because I think that is the appropriate way to tackle it. I don't think we can go too seriously too quickly, and this is perfect.
I mean, part of me is slightly sad that we don't have Rachel here as well to kind of. I feel this is room-like in its quality, and I feel that there's still penance to be paid there for having introduced us to that.
It is safe to state that the grandchildren of some of the people in this dinner will not be born on Earth. They come from the bowels of hell, a transformed race of walking dead, zombies guided by a master plan for complete domination of the Earth. Plan 9 from Outer Space. Starring the most nightmarish cast ever. Bela Lugosi, the seductive Vampira, and Tor Johnson as the Walking Dead.
Turn off your electrode gun! No! No! Stop me, Dennis!
I can't get it, it's jammed!
Stop me, you fool!
Bullets bounce off their bodies. Rockets, missiles, jets cannot stop their death ship. What earthly power can stop this terror? For a glimpse of things to come, see this blast of screen suspense. For it could be happening right now.
But I mean, there's the first question for you, Neil. Edward D. Wood Jr. How aware were you either of him or Plan 9 from Outer Space?
Well, you kind of nailed it in the intro, insofar as my knowledge extends to the Tim Burton film with Johnny Depp in it. And in saying that, I have never watched that film. But this that is my entire knowledge. That Tim Burton years ago made this film about a director who was a bit of eccentric and kind of looked down upon by a lot of, shall we say, proper Hollywood for what he was doing, and that's about all I had. And then you said, "Oh, I know. Let's watch Plan 9 from Outer Space." And I'll be honest, of all the collaborations we have done, and there have been many down the years, I feel that this may be the worst thing that I have watched at your suggestion. And we did a podcast on Potemkin, so like,
I forgot how much you were against the Eisenstein. Which is a whole other argument, but you have, I mean, to be fair, Neil, you've watched a lot of stuff that I've suggested, and I'm grateful for that, because it sort of reminds me of what it's like being introduced to films for the first time. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that we cover is stuff that I'm at least passingly familiar with before I watch it, and then I subject myself to it again. I mean, for me, like, I became aware of this. I became aware of Ed Wood back I think in the 90s. There was a Jonathan Ross TV series called The Incredibly Strange Film Show, and I remember watching various episodes of that as a kid, and I think I watched the Ed Wood one as well, and it was like a fun, interesting sort of documentary series. Didn't take its subjects massively seriously, but also was introducing us to people that were on the fringes, so people like Ed Wood and Russ Meyer, who probably is somebody else you haven't watched yet, so that's something else I'm going to keep in the little box from behind. But I watched Plan 9 at one point because I got into Bela Lugosi films. I during the 90s I was exploring horror for the first time, and I remember the whole attraction about Plan 9 was I was fascinated by this idea that they had built a film around a very brief bit of footage of Bela Lugosi, and as the original Universal Monsters Dracula, this was something I had to watch. And I recall being massively disappointed and frustrated by the film when I finally got around to it. And I think it may well have coloured my opinion of Lugosi for a number of years, because I just thought, this guy's no good. He's in trashy films. And then I watched Ed Wood, the Tim Burton film, like yourself, and I come back to it a couple of times. I rewatched it a few years ago when I was preparing for a Tim Burton project, and then I rewatched it just recently. And then I realised as well it was Ed Wood's centenary coming up, and I thought, like, this is too good an opportunity to not like go and indulge a load of stuff, and that's basically what I've gone and done.
And dragged me into it.
And dragged you into it because I think it's another one of those ones, like, its reputation is such that, you know, is it as bad as it's made out to be? I have a cycling jersey with the Plan 9 poster on it.
Right.
So it's not like, I mean, I feel like in some ways I do appreciate this film for what it is. I do quite like it to an extent, but I am aware that its reputation is the worst film ever, and Ed Wood specifically is one of the worst directors ever.
I think that the poster may be the best thing about the film.
That's harsh.
Well, can I tell you the first note that I wrote down?
Yes, please.
You asked me to do these things. I'm a diligent student and I want to please teacher. So I wrote down most disjointed opening I think I've ever seen.
Fair.
I think it's one of the most odd, all over the place openings of any film I've ever watched, because you have in the middle of it, you have a death, and then you have aliens who resurrect the body of the deceased.
Yeah.
Only for them to come back as Dracula and Dracula's wife. Is Vampira doing? Or are they even supposed to be that's what they look like? I don't know.
Did you hear anything? I thought I did. Don't like hearing noises, especially when ain't supposed to be any. Yeah, sort of spooky like. Maybe we're getting old. Whatever it is gone now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I suppose it's the iconography of the film that has always kind of appealed to me the most. Lugosi is not playing Dracula; he's playing an old man in this. There's a bit of footage from two different projects that Edward was working on with Bela Lugosi. He'd done a number of films with Bela at a point where Lugosi's life was in the skids. He's heavily addicted to morphine at the point. He's not working very much anymore. He does, during the 1950s, do a tour of Dracula as a play, which comes to Belfast in Northern Ireland, where, you and I are very familiar with. So he does, he is still performing, he is still doing stuff, but not an awful lot compared to where he'd been 20 years beforehand. And this is a man who had a great career on the Hungarian stage long before he ever got into films. He was actually quite a very competent actor. So Lugosi had met him and kind of got this working relationship. They worked on a couple of projects, and it turned out that Ed was frequently not able to get the full funding to do his projects, and stuff was abandoned left, right, and centre. And he had these two bits of footage, and Lugosi died. And they were sitting on this stuff for for quite a while. And then he's like, I've got this last footage. I'm going to make a film around this. And I love that ingenuity. It just says, I have this stuff and it's got a commercial appeal, so I'm going to do something with it. So Lugosi's just playing an old man who loses his wife through a sudden accident, who's played by Vampira in this.
with very, just on Vampira, by the way, very long arms.
Incredibly long arms. Yeah, she's got a
weirdly long arms, like not no special effects, like just really long walking in a very zombified state. I'm trying to do it for the camera, but you can't see me. It's an audio format, nail wise up, but like arms outstretched, and I'm sitting watching this thing going, have they put like fake arms on her? But they haven't.
I don't think so. No. Mila Nurmi, as she's actually born, had crafted this wonderful character, which was ended up being used on TV as like a screen queen host. So she would introduce films that were being played on TV in character, and it's sometimes seen as like this proto-goth. People will be familiar with the more familiar with the character Elvira. So there's a massive court case at one point where Vampira sues Elvira for copying her act. Because she basically, they are very, very similar in appeal and appearance.
I was going to say, who was the vampirish lady in the late 80s, early 90s that was on TV doing?
Yeah, that's Elvira.
Yeah.
So Vampira is, she has this wonderfully crafted silhouette and a wonderfully crafted look, incredibly high forehead, massive arching eyebrows, an hourglass figure that is unlike any hourglass I've ever seen and looks painful. Her waist is so minuscule. It's bizarre to sort of see.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you would think it was almost an effect.
It's not a special effect. That is literally how her body is shaped, between a combination, I suppose, of her actual body and the costumes that she's choosing to wear. But that was her sort of signature look, and she'd gone through a period where she wasn't being used for stuff, so she ended up working with Ed Wood somewhat reluctantly. But yeah, no, so she plays his Lugosi's younger wife. A lot younger, and I kind of can't quite picture the two of them together, but because you've got Lugosi, because he wears a cape, you instantly think of Lugosi as Dracula, and then Lugosi had played other vampires, so there's always that association. And because Vampira, by even just by the name, it's a vamp, it's not necessarily a vampire, but it's also a vampire look. You can't help but put the two together and read vampire into that coupling, which is probably has a lot to do with its appeal. And I think that the strongest bits in the film are probably those little silent bits of Lugosi kind of crying over his lost wife. There's a wonderful bit where he's leans down to smell a flower with with the crappy narration at the top, and the scenes of Tor Johnson and Vampira kind of wandering through the graveyard. They're iconic. They're properly like strong visuals. And that, I think, for me, is the entire appeal of the film. If you scrap the rest of it away, I don't care. That's what I want to see. I want more of that bit, please.
Yeah. Do you know, like, there were bits of it where I was like, oh, this is quite interesting. in a modern context, in a world where we live with disinformation and conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
The film does have an interesting angle on that, I think, which I find kind of like, I was trying to work out, is that an intention or is that just something that I'm reading sitting in 2024?
You believe there are such things as flying saucers, Colonel?
Yes, sir.
You've seen them?
Yes, sir.
You realize there's a government directive stating that there is no such thing as a flying saucer.
Yes, sir.
You stand by your statement that you've seen flying saucers?
Well, yes, sir.
This could mean a court-martial, admitting this against direct orders.
General Roberts, may I speak freely?
You may.
How could I hope to hold down my command if I didn't believe in what I saw and shot at?
I like you, Colonel.
Thank you, sir.
There are flying saucers. There's no doubt they are in our skies. They've been there for some time.
I think it's fairly intentional. So again, I'm providing a lot of context for stuff tonight. I mean, this is the 1950s, so at this point, it's not that long. It's a decade after the end of World War II, and obviously a lot of Americans have gone through their service and have that lasting impression of it. I think the first sighting of a UFO was 1947, from what I remember. I think that's Roswell is 47. And there is a conspiracy around aliens that sort of seems to build. And so as part of it's about this sort of the suspicion that aliens are a thing and flying saucers are a thing. But also the government won't necessarily tell the truth. I mean, yes, that does feel remarkably like the last 5 years. And it's the entire plot of the X-Files for its duration. And I suppose that does seem, I mean, it struck me as being very prescient when I rewatched this. I'd sort of forgotten entirely that there's a conspiracy subplot.
Yeah.
And a subplot where you have an Air Force man telling his boss that, I'm going to talk about this stuff, and that, it's ridiculous that the government won't let me say what I've seen when I've seen a UFO. And that strikes me as being quite bold. But this is also this is the nuclear era. This is a time where there's a lot of tension between the West and the East. There's a lot of growing fear about space as well. So it's in that context, and also the aftermath of atomic bombs. That's all sitting here in the context of the time that this film is made, and it's preying on those kind of fears.
Yeah. But then, so the aliens want us to know that they are out there, right?
Right. Okay.
According to the film.
According to the film, yeah.
So their method of doing this is to raise the dead.
Well, I mean, look, you're a man of Christian learning, Neil. It's what Jesus did. Got our attention.
But also, well, okay, right. If we kind of let that go,
you still want to talk about that, but you're trying to stop yourself
as a thing, that is an option in the world. But then my other thought is, well, surely if you've all this alien technology, you could raise more than 3 people and would be a bit more convinced.
Yeah, I'm baffled by that one myself.
Because we literally get 3 resurrections in this film.
What plan will you follow now?
Plan 9. It's been absolutely impossible to work through these Earth creatures. Their soul is too controlled.
Plan 9. Ah, yes. Plan 9 deals with the resurrection of the dead. Long-distance electrode shot into the pineal and pituitary glands of recent dead. Have you attempted any of this plan as yet?
Yes, Excellency.
How successful has it been?
We have risen 2 so far. We shall be just as successful on more.
The living, they have no suspicion of your movements?
We had to dispose of 1 policeman. However, none of those risen have been seen. At least not by anyone who still remains alive.
That's it.
Yeah.
We get the old man, the wife, and then a random
It's a cop, isn't it? It's Tor Johnson.
It's a cop. The cop gets shot and he comes back and
Yeah.
in a very kind of more zombie like, and again probably I'm saying zombie like because of probably the Dracula imagery that's sitting alongside it.
Mm-hmm.
But an undead zombie like character who's very more or even possibly Frankensteinish maybe.
I think zombie's a fair word for it. I mean, if you take a zombie in the more traditional sense, I mean, not the George A. Romero kind of late 20th century zombie that we're more familiar with, but this would be a kind of an older school zombie. This links back to Haiti, to sort of literally the dead who are kind of walking around, often controlled by somebody else, so through voodoo or witchcraft. And essentially, these reanimated corpses are controlled by the aliens. So that does strike me as being a traditional zombie. They are definitely corpses. They are definitely wandering around. So I think it makes sense. And zombies is the right word for it. I just trying to avoid it in the intro, even though it's the only word that kind of really fits. So they are. And there are only 3 corpses. But I guess that makes sense. Like, I mean, if you're a good scientist, you're not going to start with mass experimentation. You're going to try 1 or 2 first, see if the experiment takes, and then you kind of move up, scale up.
Well, this is the Jurassic Park argument, isn't it? Why did you not start with herbivores? Do you know what I mean? But that's another show altogether.
And I mean, clearly starting small proved that they were, humans are not controllable, that it's a mistake to do that, and but at least they kept it small.
We got 3 out of it.
Yeah,
I just don't know if that would make me like if that right. So let's pull all the barriers down and let's go. This could happen, right?
You're going to apply logic to an Ed Wood film?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the logic that there is a resurrection of, say, the graveyard. Mm-hmm. I'm close to Movilla Abbey, right? So say I'm in there one night. Don't know why, but I'm in there, and 3 zombie-like bodies come out of their graves towards me.
Okay.
At what point is that going to make me go, "Oh, there must be aliens"? Do you know what I mean? It's the logic or the lack of logic sometimes in this film genuinely made me laugh. Like, I just don't know how you get from, we want the story to be that aliens exist and we want humans to see aliens and believe in aliens, and their method of doing this is to raise some dead people, bring them back to life, so they will logically go, well, it has to be aliens. Because like you said, the only other the stories and the mythology of resurrection are largely religious. Nobody in this film goes, God has brought these people back to life. No. Or the devil, or no good, no evil, like in the religious sense. But we're expected to just jump to the aliens did it.
I mean, your logic is obviously stronger than Ed's was in 1956.
Is Ed okay? That's what I want.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting. Actually, thinking about when this was made, I think it's November 1956. So at the same time that they're shooting this in America, iconically, Hammer Films over in London are shooting the first of their kind of big horror pictures, the Curse of Frankenstein, and which was obviously it's a Frankenstein story. It's got color, unlike this, which is black and white. And there's also another film called Night of the Demon, which is based on an MRGM story, which is also being shot in Britain at the same time. And it just feels like there's quite a contrast between those 2 pictures for that little moment. And I'm just very conscious of this because of other stuff I'm doing at the moment as well. So whereas someone like Hammer is spending their time doing a logical adaptation of a kind of classic horror to tell a story, and also there's some morality there as well. Ed is sort of using I think he's taking that pure exploitation appeal of aliens and monsters, and there's somewhere underneath it, I think there are messages. I think that you picking up on the conspiracy element
I think there are. I think there is something very much buried beneath the kind of illogical nonsense of it. Not just that conspiracy theory thing, but I think there's something. Once you get to what, do you know what? Do you know what it is? It never sits on anything that it goes for. So it never sits long enough on the conspiracy theory thing. It jumps to something else. Because another note I wrote down is there's something in there about humanity's propensity or inevitable move / lust for violence. And I think that is in there as well, because the humans in our story end up in front of the aliens and they do what humans do, and they just try to get violent and like shoot them. and you know, they talk about, well, you're going to make this bomb, it's going to destroy the universe. Going back to the thread that's dangling of like the nuclear
selenium
stuff
or something.
well.
Yeah.
And you're going to destroy the universe, and we don't want that to happen. And they're like, okay, well then we just have to shoot you. You know, so there's something there are moments, like I say, in this where you go, oh, he's going for a message here. But then inevitably it's almost like a whip pan to something else. Look over here. It's almost like the attention span isn't long enough to pick a thread and live there for a bit. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's a fair point, and I mean, I don't know how much of that is because he's not able as a writer to maintain that train of thought, or if it is the necessity of trying to get something that's going to please a producer and returns on the investment. That's what I'm not clear about. I don't know which of the two is really the problem. I think, I mean, for me, I think having watched a number of Ed's films, not admittedly his trashier stuff, well, his sort of more adult films from the 60s and 70s, but having watched his 50s work, I think that as a jumping on point, like Plan 9 is the worst place to start because it is the very worst of his films. It is.
Well,
it has moments.
I was going to say, I don't think this is going to make me jump to watching many more, because now, very surprised by this. It is available on a streaming service in the UK that may or may not be connected to a millionaire who'll bring packages to your door, right? But the rating, as there's a few other films on there of Ed Wood's, by the way, if anybody does want to go and check them out, the names escape me. But the rating for this, which is why you can never trust the public, is quite high. Okay, did I write it down? I think it was like sitting at like 3.9 or something out of 5, like 4.1 something.
Yeah.
I expected everything that you told me and everything that I kind of had a quick scan for about how rubbish it was. And then this was sitting like, and obviously that's an aggregated review score. I don't know how many people reviewed it. Maybe one person who really loves it. But it was a lot higher than I expected.
I mean, I think there's a lot of love for this film. I think it came at such a moment, and it's like The Room, which we've discussed on this podcast before, and also I went and revisited it for the Never Seen It Film Club. So we've got 2 podcasts on it technically. I think it's a bit like The Room. It has a following, and people kind of love its trashiness. There is a lot of affection out there for bad movies, for films that are so bad that they somehow become good, and this gets listed with them. I don't think it's the worst film that's ever been made. I've definitely seen trashier, less coherent, less well performed films than this. At least this has moments, and there is some kind of messaging underlying there, which, you know, there's a heart to it. And I think it's very hard not to love something that has, the final moments of a screen icon. That's hard not to just give it that gets 2 stars just for that. I think it deserves another star for those scenes of Tor Johnson and Vampira walking through the graveyard. Although I have seen a lot of hate for the graveyard because it looks too artificial for some people, but I love that kind of Universal-esque kind of sloppiness.
I didn't mind that night. What did bug me was scenes of police arriving in the daytime to a nighttime graveyard. Things like that, that kind of, well, we just have to shoot this now, or we've lifted that from another film. This car just coming in the shot, that type of thing bugged me more than the aesthetic of the graveyard. I could kind of accept that for what it was.
I think this is both the genius and the feeling of Ed Wood as a director. I mean, the fact that he'll get this cheap stock footage and then build films around it, I think is quite ingenious. And it does make his films feel at times like they are bigger films than they actually are, that they're made with a lot more money than they actually are. The use of day for night is not unique to Ed Wood. It's usually graded better, so we kind of see we're less obvious about the join, and that's where he doesn't have that kind of extra level, so it frequently feels disjointed. So you feel like you're jumping between day and night. As I said in the start, it feels like a fever dream at times. My partner watched this with me and said, berated me for it because it's an hour and a half of her life she can't get back. I mean, I feel, yes, that's fair. I've seen this multiple times and I willingly watched it again because I thought, having watched Ed Wood, I was so enthused about that group's mentality for filmmaking. I wanted to see his films again and to kind of remind myself of where they actually are. They as bad as the reputation says? This is bad. This is terrible. I mean, I think it's for me it's exemplified with the Bela Lugosi substitute. This his proctologist or something that he thought looked a bit like Lugosi from a certain angle is like a completely wrong height. It spends his whole time with the cape around the face, which, is a good way to disguise yourself, but it's clearly not him. But again, then that evokes that Dracula memories, which makes you read his character as a vampire anyway. And I don't know, I think it's not for 1956. That is not a bad way to kind of make do of a shitty situation where you've lost one of your lead performers. It's long before CGI, and it makes a lot more out of very little material. So I admire that, and I admire his sort of eclecticism. But it is a badly constructed film on every level. I mean, they should have showed this when I was a film student and said this is how not to do it. But here's where you can learn.
I did say earlier in the recording that I think it's the worst thing that I've ever watched for CinePunked, but I don't fully buy into it's a terrible film. I think it has I like yourself, like you said, that I've seen worse things. I've seen nastier things. I've seen it's probably not the worst film ever made. I think, like you say, it gets a certain amount of cultural cachet. Like, I mean, you said yourself, you have the poster on a cycling vest jacket thing. So like, there's clearly a market for it still.
Yeah.
In this modern era, and if it was that terrible, and it was that pointless, and it had no relevance, it would have disappeared. Because those things that we've both watched that have been worse content-wise, or even like produced, they disappear very quickly. This still lives on, kind of in the zeitgeist for all its faults. I think it still has a value because of his significance, if you're doing like I suppose like a Hollywood history, you couldn't not talk about him, even if it is slightly derogatory in terms of the quality of the output. But I feel like he has enough cultural, maybe not for a purist. If you were a complete pure cinema only person, maybe you would. But if you're looking at it from a cultural point of view, I think there's a level of significance to it that probably does get it those extra stars on certain streaming services.
No, I think that's fair. I think that, I mean, I've never been keen on this idea of a snobbery around film. Anyway, it doesn't sit well with me that you can only like certain kinds of films, and I know that going through the university experience, there were people who felt very much like that. Is that, you know, there was a canon of films that were acceptable, and anything that was too far outside that was trash. And I was interested in a lot of trash alongside this canon of stuff. And I think it's also the filmmakers who grew up watching these films, who were inspired by people like Ed Wood, who saw what was possible. I mean, the fact that it's possible to make a film on a shoestring and still make some money back off it and gather together interesting people and do something that is at least creative, even if it's not good, you know, arguably, is inspirational. You know, it doesn't have to be a great film, but there's definitely something there that feels like you're trying to create. Now, you know, it's the scenes in on the spaceship and in the airplane that I think everything just sort of falls apart, because they feel very flat, very uninteresting, very dull by comparison. Although the aliens' interactions are bizarre with each other, you know.
The airplane in particular looks like it could literally fall apart at any given moment.
Yeah,
it does.
It's like a screen and a couple of, you know, it's not even. I mean, it's definitely shoestring filmmaking. Yeah. But I mean, like, you know, you're not. I appreciate that for you, like many people who've come to Ed Wood, are not going to want to explore much beyond this, because of how trashy this film is.
I think if anything, it makes me interested in the person. It doesn't really make me interested in the catalogue of work as such, but it does make me go, why are you like this? Why are you like this, Ed? Who hurt you? What happened? Like,
well, I mean, I suppose you could read all sorts of stuff into it. I mean, he was a former Marine. You know, he'd done the tour duty during the Second World War, and one imagines then when he writes a dialogue that's all about the horrors of violence, that is in some way influenced by his own personal experiences. You know, he clearly has I think he has a very emotional side, because there is this talk about relationships and longing and mourning, and that I think is very tender and feels quite profound. He was also working in theatre. Again, I don't think the theatre was particularly good, but he was at least trying, and I suppose I admire that as somebody who's trying to do stuff as well. I'm not saying what I do is great, but I like the fact that somebody maybe connects with it. I would suggest, I've debated whether or not we should do this as an upcoming pod at some point, looking at something like Glen or Glenda, which was his first big feature. Again, features Bela Lugosi, but it's a film about where he plays a sort of fictionalized version of himself as a transvestite, and this is in 1952, and I think that's a thread as well that follows through a number of his films, this sort of sense of being an outsider but also acceptance and the search for acceptance. And I find it a much stronger film. You know, it's better made. It is still bizarre in many ways. But I think if that was where people jumped on rather than Plan 9, or even if they watched Bride of the Monster, you know, they are stronger films than Plan 9 from Outer Spaces. Plan 9 is just such a mess, but it has the cachet of its reputation. It's not even the film that they spend all the time with in the Tim Burton film. This is not the focus of that film. There's a bit about it, but it's his other films that I think are more interesting.
Yeah, that's why I might give that Tim Burton film a whirl, because like I said, there is something about the individual that I go, I want to know more about why you made this weird film and subsequent films, because like this just felt so all over the place. It felt like, he gave certain people work. He had the Bela Lugosi shots and then the kind of loosely stunt double. He didn't have anything that looked like a plane, so he used some cardboard and a couple of toilet rolls. He had aliens who weren't really alien looking at all. They actually looked more like Knights of the Realm, and some of the gear that they had on, like that old kind of, like it felt like there was just like, I kind of want to know how the mind works of somebody who essentially has made a film that looks like he turned up at a lot in a Hollywood studio somewhere and went, well, this stuff's all here, let's just use that. Do you know, like that's what it feels like in some ways.
Yep. I can see that. Yeah.
Well, how will we dress the aliens? Well, I found this on a chair. Right. Okay. Let's go. Like, it. Do you know what I mean? Like the feel of it. It just feels like it's just it feels like in some ways it feels like he drew like a mind map. Do you remember mind maps when they made you do those? He drew a mind map of what he wanted and then just forgot to connect any bits of it. Really? Like that's what it feels like.
That's not unfair. Yeah, I mean it's a science fiction horror where I think the science fiction just doesn't gel with the horror so well, and then feels like there's a social commentary at play as well, which again is sort of ham-fisted. I also wonder if the film wouldn't be much more enjoyable if the dialogue wasn't so awkward.
Yeah,
he is. I mean.
Now toddle off and fly your flying machine, darling. But if you see any more flying saucers, will you tell them to pick another house to buzz? Be careful. Don't worry about me.
Oh, you're the only thing I do worry about. Oh, forget about the flying saucers. They're up there. But there's something in that cemetery. And that's too close for comfort.
The saucers are up there. And the cemetery's out there. But I'll be locked up in there. Now, off to your wild blue yonders.
Nobody involved in this feels like, without wanting to sound disrespectful, because I have no experience, a particularly good actor, right? Or B, particularly invested in anything that's going on.
Yeah.
Really? They feel like they're all just there. Some just to get paid, like you said. Some people were in financial difficulties, and this, well, I'm making this thing. Come and walk like a vampiric figure who's definitely not a vampire in the back of this. You're a resurrected zombie person resurrected by aliens. Okay, bring your long arms. Let's go. And then, like, it just feels a bit like almost people are kind of saying lines like they don't know, not that they don't know where their next line, but they don't even know where this is going. Like, they've got lines for that scene. There's nothing else. Yeah. And then they find out later on that they have to do their next 5 or 6 lines over here, like, and they've no idea how A goes to B or anything.
I mean, that definitely feels possible that it's that bad. I think it is. From having watched a number of his films, it's not that everybody who works on them is a bad actor. I think that he's picked a number of people who have long reputations who have proven their worth or their ability to some level. But I think there's only so much you can do with some of those sentences and the meaning behind them. And that, I mean, for me, it's as somebody who's was stuck whilst I was doing this, trying to write a script for something else. I'm very conscious about not becoming an Ed Wood and getting so caught up in the clumsiness of the dialogue and stuff that just doesn't feel, it gets lost in itself a lot. With a lot of dialogue that sounds like it's meant to be quite important. I think there's a lot of stuff that I'm delivering a message and I'm going to tell you all these things, and it's very, very important. I'm an important person and I can't remember what it was I was saying when I started.
There's literally a bit where the aliens, there's quite a theological conversation at one point.
Yeah.
Where they get into, somebody brings up God and the aliens basically go, oh, we know that. Mm-hmm. We know him or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they're like, you believe in God? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, now we have to shoot you. And it just, like I said before, it's just like you've dangled this thread here and then you've just took a 180-degree turn and ignored it.
I mean, is another way of reading that, perhaps, that every time he gets into something that is meaningful or a character starts kind of having an intelligent conversation or exploring an idea or a concept, that somebody else chooses to distract from it because they don't want to explore that, because they don't like the idea of having a meaningful conversation. Like, nobody wants to talk about the idea that aliens also have a concept of a god, because that makes them more like us. So let's just move on to the next thing. When it comes to sort of the grief, it's like these things can't last, and governments will do one thing, but we can't fuss about it too much. That in itself almost feels like a commentary, whether Ed Wood ever intended that to be how you read this stuff. If you're constantly shifting every time something of meaning is presented, is that an observation about the human condition?
Possibly, you're right, possibly.
Looking for something deeper in Ed Wood's films, a certain particular Plan 9.
Do you recommend this to people?
No.
Why am I here?
I did a thing for BBC Radio Ulster there a couple of weeks ago on this, on an Ed Wood for the centenary. Because he is, it's 100 years ago since he was born, and that felt like a significant moment in itself. And it's 30 years since Tim Burton made his film. Ed's been dead a long, long time. He died in I think it was 1978. Not a very happy end of life. Very broken man, suffering from alcoholism. Still harbouring dreams of making more things though. And was working up until quite close to the end in some capacity. But when I was talking about it on the BBC, I did say that I didn't think this was where you should get on to Ed Wood's films. This is not the point to do it. It doesn't. It's just too messy, I think, is my honestly, that's my feeling. I think every bit of this is a mess. I think the dialogue's atrocious. I think the storyline is all over the place. I think the acting is embarrassing at times. The photography, whilst it has some brilliantly iconic moments, is again inconsistent. Yeah. There's not a thing about this film that I think is coherent enough to say this is a film that's worth your time. I think it's worth exploring and watching, either as a completist, if you're someone who wants to kind of see certain kind of films or wants to watch all the Bela Lugosi's canon, or the Criswell canon perhaps, then fine, this makes sense. As we've discussed during this program, thinking about it in terms of its cultural cachet, it's a landmark that I think, if you're into certain kind of films, this is something to be aware of. But it's not a good film. I don't even know if it's a fun film for the most part. I do get quite bored at times watching it, because it just meanders off into something that I don't care for. But I think it's on that basis that I suggested that we watch it, because this is the one that everybody thinks they know. So if we're going to kind of explore, if we're going to do something to sort of say, well, look, you know, this is a man who maybe wasn't very good as a filmmaker or as a creator, but he managed to produce a film unintentionally that has lasted decades, that has a resonance quite unlike anything else. I think this is the one that we have to start with.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And if you do see somebody cycling in a Plan 9 from Outer Space vest top jacket thing, you know, do give them a toot of the horn, because I imagine it's you. I don't imagine there's two of you out there.
Well, if it's Northern Ireland, it's probably me, yeah. So, any final thoughts on this one?
I think, as always with these things, I think I'm glad that you made me do this. Well, you didn't make me do it. Like, you didn't have a gun to my head, but like,
that wasn't the message I got via text.
I hate you. I think it is good from that cultural significance point of view. I do think the film is absolute trash and cheap as chips, and I do think that if somebody made some kind of equivalent mess now, like I was trying to even think of like something that you could compare it to that was just so messy and all over the place now, and I couldn't even get there. I couldn't even get to some kind of modern equivalent really of it. But like if you made it now, I kind of go, would it have the legacy? Or would the filmmaker have the legacy? Maybe it's more about the legacy of the filmmaker rather than the film itself, I suppose.
I mean, I think that's poetry. I think there are loads of films like this that get made all the time. I think that there are people out there who are making little independent films who have raised it together enough money from friends and family to do their pet projects. Occasionally used to see some of them at festivals. You know, when they get their one screening and then that was it. So they do exist, but I think there's not the same kind of cult of the personality, there's not the same kind of awareness, and there's not the longevity at all. I mean, Ed Wood's films were still getting distribution in the 50s. His stuff was making it over to the UK. So the films were not sitting on shelves for decades being ignored. So something about them was appealing, but you also had a much smaller film industry back then. So there were less people making films. It was maybe easier to sell on an exploitation basis. And that's part of the reason why they got seen by so many people. And as trashy as they were, there was something about them that kind of had an appeal. I can see how, as an adolescent, you know, you could watch this film and think, this is cool. It's got you know, a wrestler, a vampire, and a very sexy woman. I mean, you know, that I don't even want to start picturing what a cast I would have now, you know, but like I could see that being done. I could see like somebody casting a remake of this and it being watchable. And I think that's part of the appeal, is you had to be the right age at the right time in the right moment watching this first time round for it to have an appeal. And then it's one of those films that got aired an awful lot on late night TV. And again, one of the joys, especially about being in your teens and your 20s, is those inevitable late nights sitting at home, channel hopping and finding something so weird that you can't help but watch the whole damn thing. And I think that's maybe what this did. I think Ed's personal biography as well has kept stuff, because he was this oddity and he was quite open about his oddities and the people he worked with, and I think that also helped.
Yeah,
but his reputation died off. I mean, he wasn't doing a lot that was very public, I suppose. He was writing novels, trashy novels, and writing trashy scripts and doing a little bit of work on adult movies in the 60s and 70s, and then he died. And it wasn't until somebody actually declared him as the worst filmmaker ever in a publication that he got this reputation, because obviously as soon as they did that, at a time where film books were not as prolific as they are now, where you know you got this Bible that says this guy's trash, people will inevitably seek out the trash. And I think there has been times where his films have been harder to find as well, and there is something about a filmmaker who it's difficult to find their work that also makes them appealing, because you're like, oh, what is this thing I've heard about or seen this photograph of in an Alan Frank book? I think that's the thing as well. It
adds a level of curiosity when you call somebody the worst at something.
Yeah.
Why are they so bad? Why,
I mean, I genuinely suspect that certainly for our generation, the generation before us, really, the guys who are now in their 50s and 60s, there were publications that came out that were full of pictures of these films that were hard to see, and you pick the right couple of pictures and that becomes an interesting thing because you're looking for that moment. And that's something I don't think we do in the same way now. I think the way that we encounter and devour film has changed. It's changed when we were kids, and we're not old.
Well, we're old enough.
So the fact that that's all changed, I think, also changes how people respond to it. And I think Ed would probably be really happy that we're having a conversation about him.
Do you think he'd be happy that he'd be on a streaming service?
I think he'd probably be a little bit annoyed he's not making much money off it, but I think he'd be...
I think there's 4 or 5 on there, if anybody does want to check it out.
I think it's worth doing. Some of them are better than others. Avoid the colorized versions when some have been recolorized, because it's a whole other debate.
Okay, that's it. That's a general rule of cinema as a whole. If anybody gives you a colorized version of anything, turn it down.
Turn it down. Yeah, watch the black and white when it was made in black and white.
Yes, please.
No, I think he'd be really happy that his films didn't disappear into complete obscurity, and I think we'd probably almost be validating him. The fact that we're having a conversation, he would say, "Well, my films weren't that bad, then, were they?" So, are you going to watch any more?
Probably not.
Probably not. Right.
Probably not. I might. Like I said, I might do a bit of exploring around the individual, but that's not the film to make him an appealing director that you want to see more of their work.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think it's interesting from a point of view of who is this agent of chaos that decided to make these films, but I don't think the films themselves. There's nothing really in Plan 9 from Outer Space that makes me go, "What's the next one?"
Well, there you go, folks. I think I'm going to leave it on that note there, because that's a nice way to put it. For me, Plan 9 is not a great film. It's not where I recommend you jump on, but it is an interesting piece of cultural curiosity, and we will probably end up linking it back into our mad world of sort of films anyway over the course of this. So, all being well, this is the start of season 6 of our podcast. After our little week, I have no idea what I'm throwing at you next, Neil.
Here, I'll tackle anything. We know the drills by now. We know when the text message comes, it's like the bat signal. I'm just like, I just answer the call, So tell me what you've got.
So I don't know what's going up this season as we kind of find our way back into doing these again. There'll probably be a nice little mix of stuff. We might do some themed episodes as well, where they'll be one after another or peppered in between everything else. I don't know. Also, hopefully we'll have some other voices as well. Not that I don't love hearing Neil, but we have always tried to have other voices in. So if you listen to this stuff and you enjoy it, do let us know. Do drop a line, get in touch, because we love hearing from people. We love a bit of a debate as well. So if you really like Ed Wood and you think that we've treated him unfairly, let us know, and we'll argue the case again.
We've got the Ed Wood fans coming for us now.
It could happen. So that's us. If you've enjoyed this, look, you can grab us all on socials. Neil, where can people find you? Can they find you anymore? I don't even know.
I'm on Instagram. That's it. The rest of them can all go in the bin. So Instagram, you can find me. I'm on there. there's not many Neil Sedgewicks about. If you put that in the search, you'll generally find me as my brain scrambles to remember what my actual handle is. But I think it's like some combination of my surname and first name. Right. That's the most rubbish way of finding anybody.
That's where you get Neil. You'll find me either as Avalard or Robert J. Simpson, and you'll also find the CinePunked accounts on various platforms. CinePunked, although we are on Instagram as CinePunked Film. So check us out, give us a hit, like, follow, subscribe, all the rest of it, and check out our back catalogue, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Until the next time, cheerio.
I did write down one line from the film.
Okay, what was that?
God help us in the future. That was the only line I wrote down.
I'm totally tagging that on to the end of this podcast.